Well, hello, Packaging 450. We are back with lecture number 15. So I hope you enjoyed chapter 5 so far. Lots of numbers, lots going on, but this is actually a very important chapter as it relates to automotive packaging because it is the crux of showing the benefit of using returnable packaging over expendable packaging and when you should do it. So we'll talk probably a little bit more about that next week with some of the things we're getting close to wrapping up with this course, but we'll talk about some of those things. Today, what I'm going to do is finish up the last couple pages of chapter 5, go through the homework, and I have some housekeeping things I want to mention about that. And also I want to mention start thinking about the extra credit if extra credit is something that you plan to do. Okay, first and foremost, I made a couple of changes to homework number 5. So when you go in there, instead of seeing 10 questions, there are 5, and it's only for chapter 5. So if you looked at the homework already, if you're super proactive, not to worry. The items for chapter 6, we're going to push those questions off. So I just want you to know that. But again, I'm going to go through the 5 homework questions. They'll still be worth 50 points. That's another thing. I think some of the homeworks at the top, they might show 20 points, but ignore that because every assignment you're being graded on 50 points, just like in the syllabus. So let's get started. Let me share my screen. And as you could probably tell that it is raining here in Michigan where I am. You could probably tell by the shorter poodle hair if you look at yesterday's video. So if you're wondering what happened, it's the rain. Okay, back to what we have here. So first I wanted to talk about the extra credit. So you can get started on that. It's a 30-minute video. You will find it under the supplemental info, and it is the extra credit history with Steve Beeler. So he's talking about the history of automotive packaging, and I'll outline some things that, I'd like you to do if you are going to do the extra credit. But if you plan to do the extra credit, I'll give you more details next week, but this is what it's based on. So if you want to be proactive and watch the video, great. I would love to hear your comments if you're enjoying the video. I thought it was really cool because I am a packaging nerd. So I hope that you all find it remotely interesting as well. Okay, so that is that regarding the extra credit. Next, I wanted to just cover what's left of the chapter. I think we have 2 pages left. We went through what we went through yesterday. We went through a whole bunch of calculations, multiple different ways to calculate ROI, to look at things like savings per year, cost per unit, savings per unit. If you look at savings per year, if you're amortizing over spreading the savings out over the life of the program, which we assumed in these examples was 5 years. But if you're going to do that in the real world, you will know what the life of the program is and what the amortization schedule is. Finance or purchasing will give you that. So anyway, we went through a lot of calculations. We'll go through the homework today too, which should coincide with a lot of that. And then this tells you, this is an example of using those same calculations that we've been talking about. And we're looking at what if we use returnable containers for all of the packaging for 12 different suppliers, that we have different parts coming into one assembly plant. So they're looking at what is the impact for one vehicle program for multiple suppliers coming into that particular assembly plant. So this gives you an idea. So this is just a summary based on using those same calculations. They're looking at a total of 80,000 roll pack bins, And remember, we talked about, the sheer volume of parts, the sheer number of like vehicles they might actually do in a day, the system days, which would be how long does it take for one pack to rotate through the entire supply chain or value stream. And just not, all the things that are going into that. So going through here, we show what that container investment is of the 12.5 million. They're showing over the 5-year period how that's broken down. So you see 2.5 million times 5 would come out to that 12.5 million that you see up here. The repair replacement cost was calculated using the formulas that we talked about earlier. It is 30 cents times a million. So, now you're at $1.5 million when you look at that. Engineering services, $900,000 or, $300,000 or $900,000 if you look at those in terms of millions. So remember, these numbers are in millions. So instead of having to write all the zeros out, they took the zeros out and just used a whole number or decimal, depending on what it was. So you can see here, again, we've got the container investment, the repair replacement cost, and then engineering services or design, all the things that went into it. So if you look at each year, the first year, you will notice that the total cash out, what they're paying out, is 3.7 million. It's higher than the other ones. You'll notice the difference is in the engineering services. That's because that first year there's more development. Their cost is going to be higher in the 2nd through 5th year. The only reason you might have some cost there would be maybe as they realized there was something getting more damage than they anticipated. The damage levels were unacceptable. What else? Maybe there was a change in the part, because it happens a lot in automotive where the part changes and then that requires new packaging and it may require some design and engineering services. I'm trying to think of what other reasons you might have. A brand new part is introduced, or maybe there's some new technology and they want to switch out the packaging. So there are a lot of reasons why you might need a smaller amount of engineering services than you would at the very beginning, because a lot of that design work is done up front, that legwork is done. So now anything you see in year 2 through 5 would be changes. So if you look, I said by year, this first year is 3.7 million, but the other ones are 3 million until you get to the 5th year. Okay, what's different here? So the engineering services is still $200,000, but your repair replacement cost has gone up over the 5-year period. And that is showing that you're probably at the end, you're starting to reconcile, you're looking at, how many containers, that loss rate catches up. And for whatever reason, they are anticipating that they're going to have more repair and replacement at the end, towards the end of that 5-year period. So that is how they came up with these numbers. So the total cash out over the 5-year period is going to be $15.7 million. When you look at the savings based on the returnable versus the expendable, basically, remember when we went through the calculations, you calculate the returnable costs and of the packaging and the transportation, and the same thing with the expendable packaging. And then you take the cost of the expendable packaging, which over that 5-year or whatever that period is, it's going to be more, most likely, than it would be for the returnable. So you're going to take the expendable packaging, subtract the returnable packaging cost that you calculated out, and that is going to give you the total savings. So you can see here, you're saving each year $22.9 million using the returnable versus the expendable packaging. And then when you look at the logistics savings, they kept this even, it's $4.8 million every single year. So these are your totals here. And you can see that the total cash in is 138.7 million. And basically what that means is your savings. That's how much cash you're keeping that you would have spent that you're not spending on this particular item, which would be packaging, and that could be used for something else. So that's why they call it cash in. So now you're looking at the cash in versus the cash out. So you just take your cash in, the 138, and subtract your cash out 15.7, and here you get a total of 123 million. So again, you've got some notes here. They use depreciation. You see the one here, straight line depreciation over 5 years, which just means that they took a chunk, an even chunk for every year for their investment for containers. Like I said, there are other ones where they might step that down, where they might, spend more the first year, or they show a higher investment at the beginning and less at the end, or vice versa. But they just decided to break it out evenly over that amortization period of 5 years. Number two here, the gross logistics savings is less the empty container return costs. So they included the cost of the return in that total cost, and subtracted that from what they would have spent, so they know exactly what that savings is going to be, because that's still a cost. They still have to run those trucks, so they're going to put, even though they're putting the returnables empty in there, they want to capture what that would be. So you'll see it subtracted out. This note says that the before taxes, the pre-tax return on investment, they did not discount for inflation. They did not discount, I'm sorry, and then they included inflation in there. So I'm sorry, no discounting for inflation included. So that's what they did. They that's a part of your, when you go into your accounting class, if you haven't already taken it, you're going to see they can have the option of discount for inflation or not discount for inflation. So they decided not to, because if they use inflation and they start calculating that in there, then for example, here would be an example of if they count in inflation. If you look at the cost of transportation, it probably has gone up over time, which, like the prices of fuel is increased. So that would be an example of inflation, or even the cost of packaging over time will cost more. So, they could take some of those things and try to balance those out, but this is more straightforward. The amount of savings is so great that those things don't make a huge difference. Sometimes with other cost justifications for other pieces of equipment, or depending on the economy or the state of that business's financial status, they may start adding in other things to make their numbers look better. But this return on investment of 7.8 is so great that they don't really need to do anything extra. Okay, so again, the container investment, I already talked about this, that's the cost of the fleet, and they've depreciated it equally over that 5-year period. Again, that's an IRS requirement. That repair replacement cost that's listed in there, that factor is including damages and loss. So that's part of the replacement, and then cost for repairs. They use 12% of each year's investment, and they put that in the cash out side of the ledger. So this is where they're doing all their accounting. So this is something that really, once you give your numbers to your return on investment in your work, when you turn that in, probably your finance team or your accounting team is going to start, letting you know what part of the ledger is going on. So here they're saying that your numbers, you're better off overestimating the cost and underestimating the savings, because that makes your business case more conservative and less risky. It covers for things like unexpected inflation or something unforeseen, supply chain interruptions, anything like that. So it's much safer. So if something doesn't go as planned, you've got a buffer and a cushion in there. So again, they're saying that you want to be on the cash out side. You want to assume that you're not going to have as much cash out, which here is, you're talking about your investment. So you want to be conservative. And so if you're somewhere between, like, you add it up and you say I'm between 13 and 15.7, you want to go towards a higher number. If you're trying to juggle your numbers and figure out which one you want to do, you want to go with the one that is most conservative, which means you plan to spend more. So you're not underestimating and planning and then running out of money. So again, it's that you'll probably hear this, or if you haven't already, the under promise and over deliver. That's what you want to do. Okay, so this talks about your engineering services, and we touched on that earlier, and how the cost impacts the design cost, and all those services can impact the cost of the packaging. This also talks about, having an outside group that can manage containers. So, we're not touching on that a whole lot. I'm going to bring that up next week, but personally, I'm not a big fan of lease containers. My experience with lease containers was not all that great. So we'll talk about the pros and the cons of it. The business cases always look really good. The spend after the fact is usually much higher than you've ever anticipated. So when we talk about under promising and over delivering, if you do look at a lease case, I'm off on a tangent here, but if you ever do look at a lease business case, you want to be very conservative and assume that your costs are going to be, and the expenses during the use of these is going to be much higher than you ever thought. So one of the reasons why you want to manage containers is because the more you keep and the more you can keep track of them, the fewer you lose, the less money it's going to cost the company overall. So container management is actually a thing. One of my jobs, I started off as a packaging engineer at the company, and I ended up moving over, still in packaging, but my title was container manager. So I was in charge of looking for lost containers, looking at which plants were an issue, which plants didn't get containers back quickly enough. And that's where I think I told you, I was trying to figure out this one plant. We were spending $10,000 a month on one package. And every month they were running out. We're like, how do we spend $10,000 a month? Other plants are sending them all their containers and we still run out. So they weren't showing anything going out because we were tracking containers. We had RFID tracking on them. So I'm like, well, they're going in, but there's no record of the equal amount going out, nowhere near. So I ended up Google mapping this and looking at Google Earth, and I see this patch of the packaging that is a lot bigger than 15-foot trailers. So I think I may have shown you all that. I'll try to find it and I'll pull it up before the end of the course. But that would be an example of, why container management is needed. And then you have theft rings. There's one of the plants we had, so we had RFID readers on most of the dock doors. One of the plants did not have an RFID reader on a couple of doors. So they were losing containers. They were just disappearing. Well, then they put a camera up to see, but apparently whoever put the camera up knew the camera went up. So all of a sudden the camera turns off and the camera's facing a different door. So they couldn't capture what was going on, which told us that, you know, it was someone on the inside that was aware of it because the camera was not capturing it. And only a few people knew that camera was up there. So that would just be an example of one of the many horror stories that happens when you don't have control over returnable containers. And then you've got, you know, the cash out is that total of, you know, everything in this row, that 15.7. And that's how they came to the total. So last page, we're talking a little bit about the expendable packaging. And when you look the savings of if going from expendable to returnable packaging. And this is a cost that they were, you know, able to get from the suppliers, and they consider a savings. And okay, this is where sometimes I think I mentioned before, in the piece price, they include the cost of packaging. When they amortize that, what they do is they say, you know, over a 5-year period, we're shipping so many parts, and each part, I showed you how you calculate the cost per pack, or the cost of packaging per part, I should say. And that is the piece price of the packaging. So it's like, when they say piece price, it's the price of one part. So that piece price of the packaging, it is spread out, and it is something that, because it's spread out over 5 years, and the agreement is that the supplier buys it, the tier buys it, purchases it when they receive it, but then the OEM agrees to pay back over time. So they calculate, in this example, 5 years, and they're paying every single part. Maybe they've added, I don't remember the amount, I'm just gonna make it up. Let's just say it's 10 cents per part for the packaging. They decided this returnable package is going to cost. So for those 5 years, they're paying 10 cents per pack. And again, I'm just making that number up because it's a round number. So they're paying 10 cents for every single part. So if that part cost $1 to make, they're going to pay $1.10, and that's going to include the cost of that packaging that we calculated earlier. So over that 5-year period, they're paying $1.10, and by the end of the 5th year, they've paid for all the packaging they bought. So in this example, whatever that piece price is that they figure out over the 5-year period, the assumption is that they're going to pay like that $12.5 million over that 5-year period. So they're paying $2.5 million every single year. Let's say if they do that over, we're just making a round number, they're making 2.5 million parts a year. Okay. So that means that for every single part, they're, you know, paying $1 or something like that for the packaging. And after the 5 years, they've paid 12.5 million. They have fully paid for what they purchased in the beginning. But let's say that this is a popular program, and they decide that, you know, this vehicle is really popular. We're going to sell it for 2 more years. Well, at that point, the purchasing team should be aware of this, and they should go back and revise the piece price to just the $1 or whatever that piece price is. So the price of that part per piece they should remove the cost of the packaging because they paid it off. That doesn't always happen though. So I think this is really, you know, something to be aware of. So you want to make sure that, you know, you have things like the POs or the purchase orders, invoices that were paid. And this is where we talk about the different phases, that in, you know, phase 4, when you launch, one of the things you really need to do is confirm that the packaging was received. Because yes, every once in a while you end up with a supplier that said they sent the packaging and they really didn't. Or I had another packaging that was an injection motor parts, and they decided to use the scrap they had left over to make containers. So they weren't paying anything for containers because the people that they made those parts for, they were paying for the scrap of the plastic, because they were saying, let's say we need 5 pounds of resin to make a part. They were charging them for 5 pounds of resin for that part. But let's say that a pound of that was scrap. They didn't say, oh, we're going to reuse that scrap and we'll subtract that from the cost that we're charging you, customer. We're just going to charge you for the 5 pounds, but we're going to save that scrap and use it for other stuff. So that's what they were doing. They were using the scrap that they were charging us for already as a part and making containers. But then they went back and they told us the containers were, 5, 10, 20, whatever the cost was a piece. They told us the packaging costs a certain amount. So those are things you kind of want to be aware of. That's why it's important to have like your, your invoices, POs. You want to confirm that the number of packs that they said they were going to ship or they're charging you for on the invoice matches what was actually received. So, a lot of times people may not do that, because if you look at this over 5 years with that example that we just went through, you're saving almost $115 million. So, most people aren't going to think much of it, but keep in mind it adds up over time, because if, let's say you're shipping 1,000,000 parts and you're paying $1 or a penny or anything, any amount over millions of pieces, it adds up pretty quickly. Okay, so another thing you want to look at are your logistics savings. What you're paying for shipping. You want to look at the rates. Again, every company has different methods. Some companies have software that look at multiple carriers or trucking companies and say what's the best for this particular route going from A to B. With these companies, they can do a cost comparison and say, this is the best route. Other companies, they have like a set rate for all their trucking companies, so they always know how much it's going to be. So, there are various ways to do this. It says here that, you've got costs are based on round trip travel, because the truck is going to go from A to B back to A. So they're going to run that cycle. So they want to capture that cost, because that's fuel, that's driver time, it's wear and tear on the vehicle or on the trucks, all these different things, handling at the different locations. So they need to capture all those costs to have an accurate idea of what their true costs are of running business, so they can charge the right amount and not go out of business or not overcharge their customers too. So, in here, for this example, they put in a provision for return freight to make sure that was included, because they just want to make sure that, they weren't overcalculating their transportation costs and saying they were saving more than they were going to. So they wanted to show that we have a cost for the return inbound with the, say, empties or, whatever that route that going back, they want to capture that. And because it is a cost of doing business, they want to make sure that it's captured. So again, here, if you look at that chart, your total cash in, which is the savings of your packaging, of the expendable packaging, and you're going to add the total net logistics savings that you have. And that turned out to be, in this case, $138.7 million spread out over, over the 5-year period. Again, you've got your cash in minus your cash out. That was equal to $123 million, again, over the 5-year period. This is the ROI, which is, what we're talking about. This chapter is about return on investment, the crux of this whole chapter. You are taking your cash in minus your cash out, And then you're gonna divide that by what your cash out is. So that comes out to 138.7 million, which is your cash in, minus 15.7 million, which is your cash out. And then once you calculate that, then you're going to divide it by the 15.7 million, which is your cash out again. And when you do the 138.7 minus 15.7, you're coming out with 123 million. So that's where that 123 came from. If you take the 138.7, which is your cash in, subtract the 15.7 million, which is your cash out, that equals 123 million. You would divide that by your cash out, or the 15.7 million, and that gives you your ROI, return on investment, of 7.8. This is a high return on investment, so it was over whatever threshold that company set. Most companies, that threshold of 7.8 is, very high, and it's going to pass over that threshold, like I said, unless there's a really, really rough year, or maybe the business isn't doing well in general. So, but in general, that's a really good number. You'll be happy to see something like that if you get that. So that is the end of chapter 5. Okay, so we'll go over the homework, and then what I'm going to do is I have a couple of examples of some calculators I want to go over as well. So we'll go over that later, but let's start with the homework. Again, we're only going to do the first 5 questions, so don't worry about, I cut out, if you look at the homework, the most updated one only has 5 questions. Those are going to be worth 10 points each. Before you have 10 questions or 5, but the homework, each assignment is 50 points, okay? Okay, so for number 1, in the case study that we looked at on pages 5.4 all the way through 5.512, okay, the high cost, one reason for the high cost of the expendable packaging versus returnable container was that the weak boxes could only be stacked 2 high. Remember, they fit 4 high in the truck, and they were showing 3 high in the picture, but the bottom one was failing. So in reality, they could only ship 2 high per truck. So they had a lot of extra space in the truck. Okay, so suppose that these same boxes could be stacked 4 high in the trailer, the way they were designed, the way that, when I say design, this is from the size standpoint. From a compression standpoint, they weren't. But let's assume that they were designed to really, you could stack them 4 high without any problem. Would this make the expendable package better than the returnable one? So justify your answer with a return on investment calculation. So basically, you've already got the information in the homework for, in the reading for the returnable case. So now what you need to do is look at the expendable case that we calculated in the homework, in the reading for this homework, and you want to take that expendable cost and change it to the 4 high versus the 2 high. Think about what that would do to the number of pallets, or those pallet boxes. Think about what that would do to the number of pallets you can get per trailer, number of parts per trailer, things like that, and what that would do to the cost of transportation. And then you would come up with, what your cost would be over the 5-year period. So again, you already have the information. It's already calculated out for the returnable. So now what you're doing is you could take the same calculations you saw in the homework, in the reading, the same calculations, and you can substitute out the stack of 2 high versus the 4 high, and think about all the things that impact this. Like I said, you've got how many you get in the trailer, how many trailers, you have, what that does to the cost of transportation, those sorts of things. Okay, so you're gonna look at what is gonna impact is your total cost for the expendables. So you go through all that in the exact same way, except now you've changed it from a 2 high scenario to a 4 high scenario. Let's see. And then from there, you can calculate the ROI and see what it does. So definitely want to see your calculations. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. I know we went through a lot of numbers yesterday, and I hope your head's finally stopped spinning, but we'll see. And then, compare that to the original ROI when you're done and see what do you think about what you think will happen. And when you compare the two, you can see what's the difference between the original ROI that we had in there, which was 5.89, and compare it to whatever ROI you're going to get by going from 2 high to 4 high. Okay. And then you'll compare that to the savings that you get for the returnable. See if there is a savings, if so, how much. Okay, and then number 2, what would the return on investment be on page 511 if you based it on 10 years instead of 5? So assume that these roll packs, they are in tender loving care and they last for 10 years instead of 5, and they're able to use them. This is not an unlikely scenario, depending on the parts. Like these parts, for example, they're clean, they're not very heavy. Maybe they're not moving long distances. They have really good control, a really good control system of returning them. It's in a closed loop, so they don't lose that many. Think about all those things, and think about what would that ROI be on page 511. So really, you're going to base it on 10 years instead of 5. So that's really the main thing that you're going to do. So you can think about all the other things that are impacted, but when you do this calculation, look at it from a 10-year period instead of a 5-year. And again, use your calculations. Calculations are your friend. Math is your friend on this. So I say this because I started out as a math major, so I love math. So math is your friend on this type of scenario. So, look at that. What does it do to that ROI that you started out with of, I think it was 5.89. What does it do when you change it? Okay, so I hope that's clear. And number 3, in the actual cost analysis, and this is going back to from pages 512 to 521, really the most head spinning stuff that we talked about yesterday. The cost of the expendable dunnage is what % of the total returnable container investment. So again, you're looking at the cost of the expendable dunnage and the total returnable container investment. So those are the 2 things that you're looking at. And you want to know what is the % of the total returnable container investment. So, you take those numbers, and again, I think that calculation, you're going to probably find that in the middle, probably around page, we're probably closer to, I think it's page 515. So, you can look at page 515 and kind of follow along with that. If you have questions on it, please let me know. Number 4, when you're looking at something like a wheel, what is the take rate? Which means, is this something that the cars use, what %? And then how many parts per vehicle are used when you're talking about wheels. So think about the car as it's driving. When you're looking at wheels, you know, how many parts per vehicle do you see on the wheels? So you don't have to get fancy. You don't have to think about like a Winnebago that has like a back tire on it. You're not talking about that. You're just looking at, you know, how many are making the car drive at that moment. Okay. Um, okay, so number 5, in the context of automotive packaging, what is a lane? So, you know, be specific. I believe you're going to find this around page 5.9, and you want to really explain what a lane is when it comes to automotive packaging. So, you know, what does that consist of? Um, you might even want to talk about how it's used, but, you know, just use your words and talk about how this is used. So those are the homework questions. Again, I will be available tomorrow, which is Friday, to go over through office hours, to go over anything in chapter 5 you have questions about, or anything that you have questions about on the homework. Again, for homework number 5, you only have 5 questions. They're worth 10 points each. You're looking at questions 1 through 5. So ignore number 6. So this is your homework. Number 1, you're gonna use your math and do and justification with the return on investment for that. What's that calculation? What's the answer? Number 2, you're calculating the return on investment for 10 years versus 5 years. The first one, you're stacking, number 1, you're stacking going from 2 high to 4 high. You're doubling the number of containers that you're stacking. What does that do to that calculation for your return on investment? Again, number 2, you are doubling your amortization period, number of years for this program that these containers will be used for. What does that do to the return on investment? In number 3, you are determining the percent of the total returnable container investment, okay, based on the cost of the expendable dunnage. Number 4, you want to describe define what the take rate is, and then you want to look at an example of wheels, the wheels that are driving the vehicle, the wheels that keep the vehicle running whenever you get in the car. How many parts per vehicle do you see for wheels? In the context of automotive packing, we're talking about cars. We're talking about cars, SUVs, sedans. We're not talking motorcycles. We're not talking about those motorcycle tricycle things. We're not talking about anything like 18-wheelers. We're not talking about, you know, big RVs or something like that. We are talking about passenger vehicles. And then number 5, in the context of automotive packaging, what is a lane? Please give a very good description. You know, write out what that is, all those sorts of things. So that would be great. So that is the homework. One of the things that I wanted to go through are some calculators. This came from one of my friends that works at Magna. So these are calculators for returnable containers. I'm just gonna pull these out real quick so you can see them. Okay, this is it right here. Okay, this one's a little bit of an eye chart. It's a little bit bright. You can see they put a lot of information in here. Okay, this one is the first one, which is their general fleet calculator. So you can see here, they only need the information in the yellow. So even though you see a lot of fields here, you're only filling out the yellow, and then it populates information. You can see here, even in this yellow, it puts in numbers, or those numbers. Okay, those numbers are just put in there. This one has information populated already. But basically, this is the same thing. they're gathering a lot of data so they can figure out what the packaging cost is. So they're doing the same thing, they're just making it more relevant to them. So notice here, they have dummy or empty layers per unit load, because some of these containers, these unit loads, maybe they're made to go 5 high, but maybe their volume's low, so maybe they're only going 2 high. So, there's certain things that maybe they're doing that they, in order to maximize the space in the trailer, they might go with, lower unit loads, but they can stack higher. So to fill off the truck with different parts. So in chapter 5, when we went through some of those scenarios where you saw the trailers, you had different parts and different colors, different part numbers, that's kind of what this represents. You can see they have a lot of information in here. Okay. So that's one. Okay, the next one. This one is what they call their build ahead packaging cost. Okay, so so here, this most likely is when they are bulk building. So let's say you have an injection molded part, and for whatever reason, the supplier either says, I can't do business anymore, the business goes out of business, or maybe the company said, hey, we need you to save us some money. And they said, we're going to bid out some other people, whoever comes with the lowest price, then they get awarded the business. Well, in order to keep this part the same, since it's, say, an injection molded part, they will maybe move the tool. So they might move the mold from supplier A to new supplier B. But when they do that, there's an interruption, because when they move that tool, when they move that mold, they're going to have to run extra, because it might take, months to transfer it. So for example, they'll run a bunch of extra material, they'll figure out how much they need. This right here kind of talks about that. They talk about how much container is needed. The time the tool is out in days right here. This says how many days on hand they need. So in this scenario, they're saying it's going to take 15 days to either move the tool, or maybe they're doing maintenance on the tool. Maybe it's a new part, or there's a change to that part. And until they can make that change in the tool, they've got to run extra material. So this tells them how many days of material they're going to need when the tool is down. So if they have to move the tool, or they have to repair the tool, or they have to do PM or preventive maintenance on the tool, they know how many days that's going to be. They're not going to be able to run material. So they have to run ahead. They have to build that up. And then they're showing they might put this in a bulk bin instead of the returnable containers, because let's say they bought enough returnable containers for 10 days. Well, just this alone is 15 days. So that means they're going to run out of material before they get to us. So they have to run extra. So they're going to run 15 days material. But because of that, because they have a loop of 10 days, for example, they aren't going to have enough. If they fill up all these containers with the bulk build stuff, and it just sits until they need it, this is going to stop running through that supply chain. So they want to keep this running through from the supplier building for regular production, current production. It gets sent over to the OEM, and then they deplete it, and then it gets sent back to the supplier. So whatever their current loop is, they're going to keep these. But in addition to these, now they have extra days worth of material. So in this example, they need to hold 15 days extra of material above and beyond their current fleet. So that's what this is helping them calculate. And they can see what their cost is. So it's cost per part to store the material, the cost for the warehousing, how much material. So in your homework, when you had to calculate how much space would the rack takes up, would racks take up if you're, introduce new racks in, or how much space do you need in the building to receive 400 trucks worth of material? In this case, you need to know how much space you're going to need to carry this banked, they call it a bank build, this banked product. 15 days worth of material. Where are you going to put that? So is there room in that plant? Maybe. Is there room in the supplier's plant? Maybe. Do they need to have a secondary location? Maybe. So this helps them determine, how much space they're going to need, how much it's going to cost, all those things. So you can see just a number of calculators and everything that's needed. Okay, this one is container comparison. I'll show you that one as well. I have another example I can show you for returnable versus expendable calculator too. So this is basically what we did on a spreadsheet, right? They got the current packaging, the new packaging, information on what the product is. They've got trailer dimensions. They've got the cost per truck. They have their system days. They have the fleet size gets calculated automatically. So everything yellow needs to be filled out. This can tell them what their cost per unit load is, tell them what their unit load return ratio is. They put that in there. It will help to calculate, how many loads per truck they have, all the things, a lot of things really that we talked about. So they put it in a spreadsheet. So they can, anytime they're doing a comparison for any reason, it could be, going from a tote to a bin, or a bin to a tote, or returnable to expendable, whatever it is, they can look at that. And again, you see here, they put in round trip transportation, they put in their packaging piece price. They broke out a lot of things in here, and then it calculates their ROI. I know you're like, okay, why are we doing this homework? But without doing the homework and understanding what this is, you couldn't build this spreadsheet to start with, or even understand what this spreadsheet is. But you can see it's basically everything that we talked about. The next one is an expendable packaging for suppliers. Okay, so this one has information. You see it's got like mileage, part weight, number of parts per container, and it shows a piece price and their transportation. This one is for companies that have metric. They have some of their container types here. These are, looks like some macros that they have there, but basically this one just gives them a basic rundown, so they can keep track of what supplier packaging is. Gives that finished goods piece price. Let's pull that one up and see what that looks like. And you see a lot of these, they show pictures, because this helps people identify what this is. So if you're saying, the part that holds the headliner, or the windshield, or the door, this helps people to know. They may not know what a rack is. So this way, you see a rack, they see a picture of it, they know what it is. The bolt bin, you can see that, versus a tote. This information, it just gives, they could pick the type of packaging. It looks like they're using 240 days per year, but they could change that if they need to. They've got dimensions in here, containers per day, fleet size, a lot of information here, piece price, so on and so forth. Oh, even their warehouse cost if they're banking product. Okay, let's see. Then we've got returnable. Get rid of this one. Okay, this is their WIP, which is a work in process. So this would be if they're not shipping it out, but maybe they need to hold parts. They're not banking it to send over, but you can see it looks a lot like the other one. But they need to calculate how much packaging they need for their internal purposes, and they can do that with this sheet. So it will give them a piece price. So again, we talked about the piece price. So it says the packaging piece price, which says that for each part, they have a cost for the package. So, you know, if it's like in a bin, this cost of $150 is spread out over the number of parts in that pack. And for each that for whatever, let's say if you got $150 for this bin and you have 50 parts in here, you're going to take $150 per pack divided by $50. So you know that each pack, each part is getting $3 of that pack cost placed onto the piece price of that part. So, you know, that's what a lot of this shows here. But you can see that it looks very similar because they might use the same bin, a very similar bin internally, but they know they're not going to ship it out. But they want to keep track of that so that they don't get mixed up. So if let's say that they know they bought 1,000 of these to ship to the supplier, but they know that internally for their WIP or their work in process, they only need 200. But if it turns out that their customer ends up with 1,200 of these, they're like, wait a minute, we don't have any containers for work in progress or work in process. So that tells them that, you know, they need to manage that a little bit better. And just because you see a blue bin doesn't mean that you ship it to the customer. So that just helps them understand and manage their containers better. Let's see, this one is a pallet box and total development timing. Okay, so this one is more for them to put a timing in here, and helps them understand. I've done this before. Tells them everything that needs to happen for their packaging throughout the program, and then they've got timelines in here. But this is good to know. This is good to have, because right now I have a customer that they're just, everything's like, we need it right now. And then when I talk to them, well, when is this going to launch? Oh, 2025. Okay, so it's really, it will take a minute to get the packaging put together, but it's not gonna, they don't need it yesterday. They need it maybe in 5 months or something like that. Their first trial probably won't happen until sometime early next year. So that's just an example. This helps to say all the things they need to do. So it is good that once you, if you're doing really any packaging, but for automotive, once you get in there and you understand what their launch schedule is really good to map out something like this. They did it in a spreadsheet. You can do it in a Gantt chart, however you want to do it. And then this one, I think, is rack development timing. So this goes along with when we talked earlier, we had a whole section on just racks in general, which is good because the racks are kind of a different animal as far as development and testing. So you can see here, what they're doing is they are, you know, they choose the manufacturer, they double check, because before they've been given a general estimate, then they want to make sure that their quote matches as close to the estimate. If it's not, then they have to adjust everything. And the reason why they do that is because early on, when they get an estimate or request quotes and it changes, the earlier number is used for budgeting. So I mentioned earlier about how program teams, they will say packaging is going to cost this much. They need to consult with packaging. So it's good for you to know what those packaging costs are. These are all the things where they have, you know, they can do the studies where they see how many parts fit, They start getting concepts or prototypes, or actually get maybe concept drawings, and then they might get some kind of prototypes after they do like the design review meeting, and then they have, you know, shock and vibe testing before they approve that supplier or the fabricators, what they call it. So, you know, these are all really good tools that they're using, and I want you to see that. So you could see how your, what you are calculating, how that actually impacts the, your final numbers for your justifications and your ROIs and things like that. Let me see. I wasn't going to do this, but I think I am going to, that's not what I want. I think I am going to pull up that video and just kind of run through it very quickly. So again, I will be in office hours tomorrow. You can always email me questions. I've received, you know, I usually receive questions. Seems like I receive questions on Sundays and Monday mornings. So it'd be great if you send it on Friday or Saturday with your questions. That would be great. Because I can't always guarantee that I'm going to be checking my messages that often. And I want to make sure you all are mastering the homework and understand it before you turn it in. Okay. Okay. Now you get to see my face twice. You get to see the before and after the hair. I haven't cut it. It's just the humidity. Okay. So this is Steve. He's a retired engineer. He races cars. So we're going to talk about racing cars in the beginning.
Hi, Steve. How are you?
Hey, we got it to work finally.
Yes, yes. Yes, so I'm recording if that's okay.
That's fine.
Okay, great, great. So I hope it records everything. You never know with Zoom, so. Okay, so yeah, so how was your trip?
Well, I'll adjust the volume here.
So
It's a bit of a mixed bag.
he's talking about early on, we're just having a chit chat about he races cars. So I thought that was kind of cool. So, but we get to the meat of this.
The card.
Awesome, so that's great. That's great, but yeah, so, but it sounds more like maybe expendable packaging, returnable packaging. I thought, well, this is a gold mine because everyone says, I don't know how it started. I don't know anybody that was there when it happened. So I have a feeling that people will watch this in automotive packaging.
Well, I did.
Okay, so that's out. You can watch the video, but he's probably surprised. When I kept telling him that, he didn't believe it, but you would be amazed at how many people I've run into that said, I know it started sometime in the 80s, but I don't know what kicked off returnable packaging in the automotive space. I don't know if any of you plan to ever, if you're attending any of the, let me stop sharing my screen. If any of you plan to attend ever any of the automotive conferences that include packaging, but if you do, you can meet a lot of interesting people. It's great networking. Let's see, I was going to show you something else as well. So bear with me here as I pull it up. Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay, so what I wanted to do was kind of go through some of this supplemental information that I put in here. Because as we're starting to wrap up this class, I wanted to make sure that you all looked at these things. Like I said, again, these are not related to the homework, but they're really good to know when you are working in automotive. Okay, we looked at this already. This is the OEM map, right? And this shows you where all of the OEMs are in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And you can see they go down the highway. So this is going from Toronto, New York to Toronto, all the way to Detroit. This is basically down I-75. This is the automotive corridor down, I think it's like I-85 or I-20 or something like that, from the Carolinas to Alabama. And then you've got here like along I-94, which is probably some on the turnpike going down from Detroit all the way over to Chicago. There are some OEMs there. And then you've got, down here, you've got some that are on the border, near the border of Mexico. I think this, okay, this is, I believe this is San Antonio Toyota right here. So I've been to that plant. That's a nice plant. And they actually have all their suppliers are incorporated. So I work for a supplier for that plant, and we could go in there and we go into our section, and they were the packaging, the products were packaging coming right to Toyota's line. So they delivered them basically to the line. So you go in like where your section of those parts were, and you could see what was going on. So it's pretty neat. And then you just see, this is basically going down in Mexico along the highway. And then, you've got a few little stragglers. You've got a couple up here in Canada. You've got one up here in Oregon. You've got one in, this is Tesla in California. You've got some along one in Baja, that kind of thing. So you've got a few scattered about, but you can see the vast majority is going to be, starting in Detroit, radiating from Detroit, going down I-75, and then heading into that more recent automotive corridor. Okay. Okay, this is an article from Automotive Logistics. This is one of the big conferences. They have it in Detroit every year, the Automotive Logistics Global. They also have conferences around the world, but the big one, the global one, is in Detroit every year. It's a really interesting conference if you're really into automotive. So let me go page 66. Okay, this one talks about packaging. And it said our our expendable is expensive. I need to change that. Change that right now. On here. Okay. Reading is fundamental, right? Okay. And you'll see why this is a little bit embarrassing that I don't know the title, because I actually was one of the people in this article giving information. So they talked about, using the expendable one-way pack or using returnables and what that means. So this is an interesting, a lot of things about what we talked about, so we talked about things like cross-docking, things that are getting unpacked and then repacked, which might be kits. Sometimes it could be things that are, cross-docked and handled there. Sometimes they're put into a supermarket and pulled out for whatever reason. Sometimes they're inspected. They need to be inspected. There are a lot of different reasons. Some of the parts may be very sensitive and need to be in a clean room environment. So there are a lot of reasons why they might unpack and repack. Okay, so this says here, while the long-term protection and efficiency benefits of multi-use returnable packaging makes it a clear winner in many ways, which is what we spent this whole chapter talking about. expendable packaging does have a niche in automotive. So this is talking about, why you always want to consider all your options. So again, we talked about those decision charts. Those decision charts will lead you down what's the most likely scenario that you want to drive to, but you still want to do your homework and do your calculations and understand. Okay, so again, the things that we talked about when we go through the calculating return on investment and looking at all the factors about doing the justification, we're looking at cost, of course, that looks like the main thing, but quality is important too. That scenario where we looked at they're stacking 3 high, but the boxes are failing on the bottom. So do you redesign the expendable or do you look at returnables? That would be an example. Another one has to do with, operational efficiency. So, is it easier to have something like this that's more structured that can go on a material handling equipment, or is it more efficient to have expendable packaging for whatever reason? Okay, so yeah, this was a long time ago. So that's when I was working for Johnson Controls in supply chain. But there are some things in here that were kind of important. So, the amount of labor that's needed for expendable packaging can be more, because you've got to have someone to take away that corrugated or the bags or plastic, whatever it is they're taking away. They also, what do they do with it? Do they do they put it in the trash and deal with the trash, or do they recycle it? What do they do with that packaging when it's done? But there's something has to happen. They have to move it out the way. This with returnable, you have to handle that as well. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to return it? If these are standard containers, you can set some standards. So those are kind of things that they looked at. Someone else, so there's a guy named Rodney Salmon who he talks about the amount of dust that can be an issue if you have parts that need to be in a clean room environment, or they're sensitive to dust or debris, those types of things. We talked about ergonomics. Okay, so Dan works with Orbis, and he's talking about putting a lot of parts in in a returnable packaging. I talk about line presentation, meaning, how does the operator handle the parts? Is it very efficient? Is it ergonomic? Are they going to have to pick it up and move it in different directions, or is it going to be brought to them the way it needs to be? Or are they going to have to take the parts out? Some parts come in and they're wrapped in plastic, they're in paper, they're in boxes, or maybe they're in a tray or something like this. And let's say you have a part, let's say you have this that comes in a tray, right? This will come in a tray and then it's in a bag. They have to unbag it because maybe this particular material is more dust, versus you can take this same pack, same size, and have these parts, and maybe it's clean enough. You can put a lid on it or have some kind of Dunnies that covers it, and then maybe that may be sufficient. Or maybe you have some kind of tray that can cover it. There are a lot of different things that you can do. So those are just some of the things you have to think of. Another thing is you want to consider when you have things that are going overseas, or even even across country domestically, they could be going from one coast to the other. In those cases, it might make sense to have expendable packaging versus returnable because of the distance and the sheer cost of the freight. So, you know, those are things to look at. Um, let's see. What else is in here? But yeah, you know, if you get a chance, print this out, save it, read it for later if you want. You know, you can always go to Automotive Logistics and you can actually subscribe to their magazine. You know, you can Google them and you can actually go and subscribe and get either an electronic copy or a print copy. Get emails from them about the latest and greatest in automotive logistics. They have, you know, the logistics for inbound, which is a lot of what we're covering, but they also have a whole conference just for finished vehicles. So there's a whole, you know, I didn't really get into this during this class, but, you know, there's a whole world just to ship vehicles, and it's a whole other thing. So the packaging doesn't, we get involved in some of that, but not as much as the inbound. Okay. Okay, I know that man is smiling at you. Okay. We did the ISPM, which is that heat treated pallet information. It talks about when things have to be heat treated and how to stamp them. The Michigan Container Act of 2012, I have 2 copies in here. Wait a minute, why is that in here? Okay. Go back. Let's go back here. Okay, so I'm going to unhide that so you can see it. Okay, the Plastic Bulk Merchandise Act, which is Act 186 of 2012. Basically, if you steal containers, it's considered a felony. So if you get in the automotive, and I've never had this happen to me, but I know other people that people have offered them used/stolen containers or offered to work with them in a ring to lose containers in their facility, and they get paid for lost containers. So don't let that temptation get to you. There is a lot of money into it, but also be aware that organized crime, believe it or not, has gotten into stealing containers for some reason. So it is a felony. If you do decide to get involved with this and you get caught, you might not want to do that. And I know someone that ended up going to court and almost went to prison over this. So he was not a happy camper. He had pretty young kids, and he was pretty worried, like, what if he went to jail? You know, so I think he stopped. So I didn't really talk to him about it too much, but he definitely almost went to prison over it. So it's something that you just don't want to do. But so, you know, read this over. It's only 3 pages. I'd say get a print a copy of this. Okay, here, tagging and holding plastic bulk merchandise containers. So I would say that, I think I mentioned this, one of the ways that organized crime has gotten around this act is they put shredders in their trucks. So they just throw the bins into the back of the truck, right into the shredder. So if they're driving and they get pulled over, now they've got a bunch of shredded pieces of plastic. No one can prove where they came from. But if they get caught and they open the trailer and the trailer's full of these and they're empty and they say company A on them, they can't really explain why they have them. And then they find out that, you know, this company, maybe they've been losing containers and trying to figure out why. This could be a reason why. So if they get caught, it's a felony with the plastic bulk containers. Okay, it says violation, misdemeanor, felony, penalty. Okay. This says not more than 93 days or a fine of $500 or both. But I think this is where that guy that I told you about, he was pretty worried because, okay, if a person buys or sells 10 or more plastic bulk merchandise containers from a person in a single transaction and knows or has reason to know that they were stolen, the person is guilty of a felony punishable by imprisonment for not more than 5 years, or a fine of no more than $5,000, or both for the first offense. And if it happens again, it can go up to $10,000 in 5 years or more. So it happens. Like I said, he thought he was going to go to prison for a while. And I told you I had one job where I went to work and they had containers, and they were like, we got these really cheap, but they had tracking tags on them and the name of the former company. And I'm like, these are stolen. I had a friend of mine track them, and they came from a plant that I went looking for them from. They were supposed to go to the plant. They never showed up. So they were intercepted before they made it to the supplier. So they bought the containers. They said their supplier lost them. The supplier paid for them to say, oh, I lost them. I owe you this money because you never got them. But then they went back and they sold the containers for the same amount. So they paid, let's say they paid, we use that 150 again, paid $150 for the container, said the supplier lost them, supplier paid them back. So they were broke even. Supplier lost $150 per tote or container on these. Then the company was break even, but then the company turned around and sold that same container for $150. So now they've made $150 on a container, and the supplier lost $150 on the container. So anyway, okay, so you can see that you've got fines, all kind of monetary damages, prison. So just keep this in mind. Feel free to make a copy of this and keep it handy at your desk, and just please take that very seriously. I put the, okay, what I'm gonna do real quick. This one I looked at. I need to make this, I'll figure out how to make this one. I get rid of it. So, okay, and then we've got, I've put in some Buckhorn and Orbis catalogs as well. So you can see those. I think you all looked at those already, but I just wanted to see, you know, what they look like. And you can Google them. You can Google Buckhorn, you can Google RoPac, you can Google Orbis, you can just Google returnable containers. I think we've got Bradford. There, you know, there are other ones that are, I think, Triple Diamond. There are a couple other ones that are pretty popular, but again, you know, I would say you want to look at new containers versus buying used containers, unless you know for sure where they come from. So I just want to go through that, some of that supplemental data with you. Again, if you're interested in extra credit, I'll have more details on it next week, so you can do that, get some extra credit if you feel the need to. I think for the most part, everyone's doing pretty well on the homework. Anyone that has questions, they can, you know, get their questions answered. But again, I know I owe you a couple of homeworks, and I will get you those. You'll have those very soon. And I think that is it for today. I've covered everything. We will round off next week with some chapter 6. I'm going to go into, oh, I know, that's the other thing I wanted to show you. We'll round off with chapter 6, and we're going to talk about, you know, some returnable containers and those sorts of things. Okay, this was something that I actually put this together. You can fill out a lot of information on here. You can put, you know, like, okay, program life. You can say we'll do the 5 years. You can have production days in a year, but to 250. The annual volume, we'll say it's okay, so it tells you the daily volume is 1 million. Let's back that up a little bit, because that's a lot. Okay, we'll just say 250,000. Daily volume's 1,000. You can put part numbers in here. You can put a zip code in here. or you could put an address. You could put a city. And this would be if you have multiple locations, right? He tells you like your round trip, how many miles it is, put information in here. You can put your returnable price. I think we'll just say, okay, we'll say it's a 150. I'm just gonna go off the top of my head. And we'll just say it was 30. I don't remember exactly. Let's say you had 50 parts per pack. Your part weight is 12 pounds. Your pack weight is 3 pounds. It shows you what like your gross weight is for this. Then you have your inbound days. Maybe we'll just say if you're holding things in inventory, how many days you have for production, how many days of inventory, and then your outbound days. Do you have a border crossing? We'll just say yes. I'm missing something because it's not calculating it. Okay, over here. Let's see if it works. Okay, so now it tells you here your transit time. Your system tells you what your system days are. It tells you what your fleet size should be. And it tells you like your returnable pack, it's $51,000 over the time you picked. And then it tells you how much expendable packaging will cost. So that's just an example, real quick, dirty way to do it. But basically I used all those calculations that we just went over and a few other things to figure this out. But there are a lot of ways you can do it. So I just wanted to show you guys that really quickly before we left. But again, office hours tomorrow. Questions on your homework, let me know. It's due Monday at 10 a.m. And next week we will be wrapping up and covering things like the rental and lease companies, and go over some other examples for automotive packaging that we haven't covered. So looking forward to next week, and I hope you enjoyed this lecture. All right, I will see you soon. Bye-bye.